apart from the fact that there will be a ceremonial handover where we assume presidency for a year. What exactly will be our role and how can we shape and direct it? Ambassador Ponappa, let me come to you on this. As with every major visit when Prime Minister Modi goes, there is a lot of attention on, the body language, him meeting and hugging world leaders, etc. But give us a clearer viewpoint of India's role right now at the G20 platform.
Well, of all the documentation that has come out so far from the summit, we have the text of the Prime Minister's statement at the working group on food and energy security. And that was interesting for 2 or 3 points that he made. Number one, he categorically called for a ceasefire and a return to diplomacy. It wasn't just a question of a return to diplomacy. He said it is time to return to the path of a ceasefire. Now, this is as clear as it can be, and it really builds on his earlier statement made in public when he engaged with Putin about this not being the era of war. So India is very clear in terms of where it stands. Secondly, he again categorically stated that on issues of the supply chains, on the crisis of essentials, he used the word havoc several times. He said the UN has been unsuccessful. Multilateral institutions like the UN have been unsuccessful. And in many ways, whether it is the G20, East Asia Summit, the COP, these are all attempts to try to find alternatives to really the kind of sluggishness, frankly, that the UN system has got into, and in terms of denying itself the kind of reform that today's world calls for. So, and he spelled out India's objectives going forward with regard to what it would try to get G20 to focus on during its summit. He talked about the risks of uneven recovery from the pandemic. He talked about debt vulnerability, the conflict in Europe, food, energy, and inflation, the need for green development, lifestyle environment, inclusive growth, the involvement of women, the gender aspect, and the pains of the global South. And he ended with the need for reform of global institutions. So I think you will see a lot more coming out of India on these particular aspects. And these will resonate not just in the G20, but in all other international multilateral fora that India will participate in order to give the Global South the greater voice that it requires at this time. The External Affairs Minister has talked about the pains that developing countries face as a result of this war. So there will be a lot of urging with regard to the war. A mere statement of condemnation is neither here nor there. And one can say things in private, perhaps, that one does not say in public. But I think these are the areas that India will focus on as part of moving.
A packed schedule for Prime Minister Modi. All of those meetings you're seeing on your screen on November 16, by the way, is in local time in Bali, when all of those meetings will take place. I want to talk about one set of pictures, Ambassador Prakash, which a lot is being made of, is when Prime Minister Modi meets Xi Jinping and they shake hands. And it's, being looked at as important considering there has been so much strife between India and China. China still continues to occupy part of our territory. Do you think that this is an important sort of moment for the two countries? Of course, no bilateral has been scheduled so far. How do you look into those pictures?
Tamanna, with China sitting on our border and the entire border live, with the kind of infrastructure that is being built, the kind of training that is being given, it is quite clear that China is in no hurry to withdraw. And given this kind of a situation and the muscular approach that Emperor Xi Jinping is now projecting and talking of urging the military to win and prepare for local wars, means conflicts in the periphery, the task is cut out for us. Now, in this kind of situation, meeting of the two principals would not have yielded anything. It would only have, each side would have had to take a posture or play to the galleries back home. The best possible outcome was a kind of a handshake that has happened, because at the end of the day, what we say for Ukraine and Russia can be said for any country or situation, that differences cannot be sorted out through the barrel of the gun. It has to be done on the negotiating table. India and China are destined to be partners, destined to be neighbors. We have the geography which we cannot change, so we have to find a solution. But this is the best that could have happened. I don't think that this will change things very much. I don't think that this will bring down the acrimony. But hopefully, we will continue with the talks, continue with the dialogue, and hopefully things will, there'll be more movement. That is the best outcome at the moment, because I do not see China relenting in a hurry.
All right. So, Maruf, your take, India at G20, the role that we can play, and this vis-a-vis our stance on Ukraine and Russia. Ambassador Ponappa talked about a very key portion of the readout where we speak of a ceasefire. Do you think there is a hardening of position, or is India's position still very, very clear? We're not going to take sides.
There's been speculation before Mr. Jaishankar went to Moscow that India was going to become the negotiator on the Ukraine conflict, and there was no mention of it after his visit to Moscow. And so there's a lot of this kind of talk which comes out, not just in Indian media, but even Western media, because of the reason that India seems to be one of the countries that enjoys the confidence of Moscow and Washington. But I think there is a history. India has an allergy to mediation, and India has from time to time made a statement that this is a conflict in Europe and the Europeans have to sort it out. We can only urge peace and dialogue, which is our traditional Gandhian stand. Now, the fact of the matter is that we cannot jump into it with a flag in our hand and say, follow me, because the rest of the countries are waiting and watching who's going to be the first one to be invited to take the call. And more importantly, does America want a ceasefire? Does Russia want a ceasefire? My research has shown that America is making a decent amount of money out of selling arms. America has also found a leadership role in Europe when it was booted out of Afghanistan. And Mr. Biden has now found his calling card as he's become the leader-in-chief of Europe and NATO, which is what the role America had before Trump went and spoiled the party. Now, as far as Putin is concerned, Putin is not in a mood to give in, because having started the conflict, he has to go back to his people with some serious deliverables. And the interesting thing is, despite the annexation talk, two of the regions, Zaporozhye and the one near Mariupol, those regions, the Russians have said that the boundaries are not very clearly defined. If the world is willing to accept that the Russians are there to stay in that part of Ukraine, like they were willing to accept Crimea, despite the utterances here and there, then we could see the easing off of tension. These attacks on Kyiv that's happened today, I think they are a distraction. In military terms, we call them a feint, so that there is panic when Zelensky is showing the victory sign, there's suddenly bombing and half of Kyiv goes lights out. So there are lots of issues there, and there is money to be made both by Russia and America with this ongoing conflict.
Well, what about the impoverishment of many countries in the world? The poor are getting poorer.
That's the important, Tamanna, that's the most important thing, that, sadly, history has shown us big powers pay lip service to the requirements of the poor man on the street, but big powers will do what their big agendas tell them to do.
Well,
so this is one of the ironies of geopolitics. The two distinguished ambassadors might correct me on that, but that is the real challenge, to find that one element that will twist the whole story around to the table. And
G20 is definitely an opportunity with some of the most powerful people and some of the most powerful leaders in the room. Are they going to do something about it or not? Remains the key question. I'm going to wrap it here, but I want to thank all of you for joining us